So this is the second part of the story that we are pretty much never told, that actually not only the church has apologized for Galileo's trial to the science, to the society, but also the scientists apologized for Galileo's trial to the church. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video I wish to discuss the story of Galileo, which you probably have heard about, the story about, the heliocentric system and the church's fight against it. But I want to discuss this story in two parts, in the part concerning the church and the scientists' response to it, alright? And usually we're only told the first part, the church part, alright? So the second part is usually like swept under the rug or just completely forgotten and omitted. So I want to make some sort of reclamation for that, alright? And make a moralistic conclusion at the very end, okay? So a couple of dry facts to start it all. As we know, or probably know, or could know, in 1632, Galileo published his book about the two world systems, geocentric and heliocentric, namely the dialogue concerning the two chief world systems. And already in the following year, in 1633, the Inquisition has forced him, the Inquisition of the Catholic Church that is, has forced him to recant his theory, his theory, the heliocentric view of the world, that the Earth moves around the Sun, obviously, right? And he did, under the threat of torture, supposedly. So he said, all right, you're right, guys. But then, of course, and by the magic of video editing, you can see the painting of Galileo's trial from 1847 by Robert Fleury, right? And again, famously, as the legend states, Galileo left the courtroom saying, and yet it moves, right? E par si muove. Okay, that's the beginning, the preface, alright? So one part of the story that we're being told about this whole shebang is that, eventually, like a couple of centuries later, the church has admitted that it was wrong, right? So throughout the first half of the 18th century, the church slowly adopted the heliocentric view themselves, right? In 1758, in particular, like the general ban on heliocentric publications was lifted, the church ban that is. And after 1835, actually all of Galileo's works were unbanned. Actually, even before that, they were published with the approval of the church, but this particular one that I've quoted at the very beginning, that I've named, about the two chief world systems, was still banned. But in 1835, all of them were unbanned completely, right? So already 200 years, basically, ago. And yet still some, Dawkins-style atheists keep claiming that church says that the earth is flat, etc., etc. And that's it. It's in the center of the world, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, of course, famously after that, in already like super modern times, on October 31st, 1992, the Pope John Paul II has acknowledged that church has erred, right, in condemning Galileo. So, and he noted that the theologians who condemned Galileo, this is actually an interesting note. So theologians who condemned Galileo did not recognize the formal distinction between the Bible and its interpretation. Sounds interesting, right? But anyway, the news were all over the place that, oh, okay, the church finally apologized for Galileo. Something like that, right? This is the only part that matters in the public's eye, anyway. But we'll remember that note. Anyway, so that's one part of the story, right? The church was wrong, and eventually it admitted that it was wrong, all right? So everything's cool, science, hooray. But Fortunately, or unfortunately, I would say actually fortunately, there is a second part of this story concerning how scientists themselves view this whole process and the problem behind Galileo, let's say. And here I wish to talk about Philipp Frank, who you may have never heard about, but he was one of the one of the best philosophers of science in 20th century. He was born in 1884, so he was like an old school guy, in Vienna, by the way, in Austria. So he was part of this big cultural movement in Austria that has given us many, many great names, including, by the way, Ludwig von Mises and the Austrian Economic School that I love to quote on this channel, right? And things like that. But not only that, obviously. So he acquired his PhD in 1907, being supervised by none other than Ludwig Boltzmann, basically a father of statistical physics and, to a degree, thermodynamics, right? But then, well, he worked in Europe for some time, but then in the 30s he was invited to Harvard to read a series of lectures or something like that. But then Nazis have invaded Czechoslovakia in 1938, so he could not return back. So he stayed at Harvard and pretty much, well, lived the rest of his life in the US, teaching there mostly. Not sure what his formal position was, but anyway. And those of you who are into alternative science circles, you may know the name Halton Arp. So Halton Arp actually attended courses of Philipp Frank, and he said that these were his favorite courses at Harvard, actually. Okay. For those of you who don't know who Halton Arp is, he's one of the guys who advocates that cosmological redshift is non-existent, basically, that it happens through other mechanisms other than cosmological expansion. But anyway, so Philipp Frank worked in Vienna before he emigrated to the US, well, not only Vienna, in Europe in general, and there was a so-called Vienna Circle, and it was like a collective of physicists, well, not only physicists, scientists in general, including physicists, and philosophers. And so it was sort of like this intellectual, I don't know, sort of beau monde, you know. So people just exchanged ideas, attended lectures of each other and promoted various stuff, various new ideas and seminars and things like that. So this circle was chaired by Moritz Schlick, another famous scientist and a philosopher of science. Also a Nietzsche fan, by the way. So, and among others, probably most of the names of the people attending there would be unknown to you unless you're super into philosophy of science. But among others, who were members of this circle included Albert Einstein, Bertrand Russell, and Ludwig Wittgenstein. So you probably heard at least these names. All right. So, getting finally to the salt of this video, so to speak. So in his lecture in 1929 in Prague, at the meeting of this Vienna Circle, it started operating in 1924, I think, actually. But in 1929, they've adopted proclaimed a manifesto of theirs, so it was a kind of an important year. So in this year, Philipp Frank, in Prague, at his lecture, has actually apologized to the church for Galileo, believe it or not. In particular, and actually, his parts of his lecture are sort of in a reworked form, are reproduced in his book from 1949 called Modern Science and Its Philosophy. I'll link it in the description on page 91 if you're interested. So yeah, Frank apologized to the church for Galileo in 1929, whereas, the Catholic Church apologized in 1992, even with an asterisk, remember that note that I've underlined above. So, Philipp Frank emphasizes certain things about the Galileo process, in particular, in his apologetical speech, so to speak. So he emphasizes that the inquisitor, Robert Bellarmine, or whatever, however you pronounce it in English, actually told Galileo that during the process, I mean, during the trial, that he, meaning Galileo, built not a model, actually, he built a model of the world, right? And not uncovered the truth about the world, if you know what I mean. So the church, at least following from the words of this cardinal, was perfectly happy with Galileo using the heliocentric model as it is, as a model of the world, right? But it was very concerned with Galileo calling it, you know, some sort of like ontological, fundamental, metaphysical truth about the world, right? Because, well, church obviously has its own source of ontological, metaphysical truth about the world, which is the Bible, right? So, yeah. But Galileo still was too arrogant, right, to admit that it was just a model. Or he was just stupid, or these are two sides of the same coin, arrogant and stupid, I mean. So he still continued to claim that it's the truth, that whatever he found, right? Or not even he, but he promoted. And again, this quote of his, even though it's kind of legendary, so maybe he didn't say that, but that this, and yet it moves, it just shows you this arrogance, you know. All right. So this is the second part of the story that we are pretty much never told, that actually not only the church has apologized for Galileo's trial to the science, to the society, but also the scientists apologized for Galileo's trial to the church, right? So yeah, that's kind of an interesting story. So moral of this story, I wish to return for a moment, and this is kind of sort of the conclusions of this video already. So I wish to return to my video, very old video named 7 Lessons from Copernican Revolution, where I actually talk about this heliocentrism, who actually developed it, etc., etc. Why it became so popular, and blah de blah. So in this video, among other things, I underline the point made by Einstein, by the way, maybe actually informed by these talks of Philipp Frank, because again, Einstein attended these as well, among others. So the point made by Einstein that actually, you know what, like geocentric and heliocentric systems are equivalent, right? Because there are no preferential reference frames in the universe. Therefore, you can link your reference frame to the Earth or to the Sun, and it's perfectly fine. Like, none of them is superior to other in any way, right? So it's a very, very deep and problematic point for, at least for Galileo's arrogance in terms of him finding the truth, right? There is a deeper truth, at the very least, which kind of undermines his pathos, let's put it this way. But that's sort of a low-key morale, I don't know, of the story. A high-key, if that's even an expression, would be an even larger point of mine that I keep repeating in many videos, that actually it shows you how poorly scientists are aware of, like, even the basic philosophy, like, what is knowledge, like, what are we even doing as scientists, right? How it all works, I mean, the process of science, like, what are we doing? Like this is probably the basic thing we're concerned with here with regards to this video and its points. So yeah, for the most part, I would say that scientists don't actually understand what they're doing. Like, they're just like chaotically, or rather they were trained to do some stuff and they continue doing this stuff. And then only in their free time, they're kind of thinking about it by themselves pretty much, right? They never go as far as to actually, well, think about it in a more fundamental way, or at least like study what other people thought about before, people like Philipp Frank in particular, you know, like he was a theoretical physicist himself. Anyway, so what scientists are actually doing, and this is my point already, they don't uncover the truth, right? They don't reach out to touch some very super fundamental ontology or metaphysical reality, but rather what scientists are doing, they're constructing objects. Again, see my video, Nature of Knowledge, where I discuss this in much more detail. And, well, there are plenty of other videos, really. And actually, a couple of points I wish to make to sort of defend the church here, if you wish. I never thought I would do that, but why not? I mean, give credit where it is due, right? So one thing is that the church, and in particular Pope Urban VIII, actually supported Galileo, at least before 1632, before this book of his, and kind of helped him, right? And even after that, during the trial, the church and its officials were kind of supportive as well. Like, they've advocated specifically to, you know, for house arrest as the measure of punishment for Galileo, even though a much harsher punishment was possible, right? He could have at least gotten in jail for that, in prison, or even, I don't know, being executed or something. Not sure what the regulations were, but house arrest is a pretty mild, you know, means of persecution. I don't know, what's the proper word? Probably this one. That's one thing. So the church wasn't as bad as it's usually depicted in this situation, right? That's what I'm saying. Also, remember what this cardinal said. He actually was kind of on the modern level of philosophy of science, actually, even though it was almost 400 years ago, right? And another interesting thing is that on February 15th, 1990, the later Pope Benedict XVI, he was a cardinal back then, so he also made a statement about Galileo. Well, like at least maybe several statements, I don't know, but this one kind of stands out, saying that the church was actually right during this trial. So it was 2 years before the other pope actually apologized, but this pope, who actually became the pope afterwards, said that the church was actually right and actually smarter than Galileo himself during this trial. And I actually agree with him, right? With Benedict, I mean, later Pope Benedict, cardinal then. Yeah, it kind of, so in general, like, let me summarize it like this. It shows how whenever, like, whether you are like a devout believer and a church official, or you are just a rigorous, diligent researcher, I guess, into philosophy of science, you can pretty much arrive at the same conclusions, right? Basically, okay, let me summarize my own view then. There is no truth. Scientists don't uncover the truth. Neither does the church, actually, but, I mean, they have their own dogmatic thing running. Rather, scientists construct objects, right? That's what science does. It constructs objects. And that's it, pretty much. The church also constructs objects. The God is such an object, right? I mean, probably the church was established after this object was constructed. Actually, maybe not. I don't know. Okay, we're getting too deep into this stuff. All right, that's probably all for today. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.